morning, everybody, and welcome to our Mitel Tips and Tricks webinar series. Today we have Mike DeFilly presenting for us. I also have some exciting news we wanted to announce for you guys. Last month, Mitel announced that we are their Government Partner of the Year for 2021. That's an exciting announcement, and honestly, we couldn't have done it without you guys' support. Also, last Monday, we were upgraded in our partnership with WatchGuard from Gold to Platinum partners. This is a great thing that happened for us. There is only 23 partners in the world that are considered Platinum partners with WatchGuard. So we are excited to see what that comes in the future. And we honestly, your support is what has gotten this point in our partnerships with all of our partners. So again, we greatly appreciate you guys joining us. With that, I'm going to kick it off to Mike. Mike, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks so much, Brittany. Good morning, everyone. Wanted to do something maybe a little different and basic compared to some of my previous ones. I did see we had a lot of names I hadn't seen before in the attendee registration, and figured we might have some folks out there just looking to get familiar with some of the basics of the system, and wanted to take the opportunity to do that today. So what I'll be doing is kind of our basic admin training, the same kind of training we would deliver to an on-site administrator at the completion of an installation or a refresher course we would normally deliver to someone. On a working system, using our own system here as a demo, and just go over the basics of system administration, a little bit of the architecture, so you can get familiar with the system in case you're maybe inherited it or coming at it maybe for the first time. So the first thing I'll bring out or note here is that all of the system administration for the Mitel MyVoice Connect legacy ShoreTel system is done through what we call now Mitel Connect Director, used to be named ShoreWare Director previously. This is the web interface based on your primary server, your headquarters server, or HQ server, that allows you to configure the entire system. The way you get to that through any web browser here is by browsing to the name of the server. So in my case, it's cdirector.vertex.com/ShoreWare Director. There's a couple other links that'll work and get you into the system to the login page here, but this is kind of the traditional one. When you browse to this link, it'll take you here to a login page. You may also be presented a pop-up for Windows credentials if you have the Active Directory integration feature enabled, but you should be prompted for a login. And we'll log in here with credentials that give us access to Director. Kind of by default on a brand new system, this is going to be just admin and change me. One of the first things that happens when a system gets set up is this gets changed. So if you're not sure of your admin credential, we can definitely help out in that scenario. But you should already have a login here that'll get you into Director. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my credentials here. And you'll see here when we get logged into Director, it's going to go ahead and drop us on one of our primary status pages. Just a little bit about the way things are organized here in Director. You'll notice on the left-hand side of the screen, I have kind of a toolbar section. This is very similar to the way the configuration used to work in 14.2, where I have some different things I can click on here that'll take me to different pages. And at the very top of this toolbar here on the left, I have 6 larger buttons that represent the main sections of our configuration here. So the first wrench button is the administration section. This is where we can make changes to the system. All of our configuration is done here for the most part. Our second button here is system, the gear icon. This is where we can see licensing information, set up additional admin permissions, and make some other changes. Our third button here is reporting. So this is our built-in reports here. So in Director, we do have access to a few simple built-in call detail reports. Our fourth button here is a link to documentation. Nowadays, this is just a link to Mitel's Document Center website, where all of the documentation has been centralized now. So if you're looking for any documentation, you'll find it in Mitel's Doc Center. Our fifth section here is maintenance, and this is where you'll land when you initially log into the system. This is going to give us status information about all the components of the system. So whereas on our first wrench button, we can make changes, our fifth button here in maintenance allows us to kind of view the status of everything as it's configured now. And then finally, our last button here, diagnostics. Really, this is where we come if we're doing some kind of in-depth investigation. We do have the ability to run remote packet captures on some of the equipment. And we also have a tool that allows us to test trunks coming into the system to make sure that they're working properly. So going back to, yes.
We've got a quick question. One of our customers, they said they recently moved their server and they were wondering if their Connect directory is on the same site or if that changes after they've moved.
Yeah, generally it's going to be in the same location. If we performed a kind of a server migration and the name of that server has changed or its IP address, then this would just be located at that new server. Connect Director is always located on the HQ server, so just a single server in your environment is going to hold this director role that allows us to make changes. But yeah, usually once it gets kind of set up on a phone system, we usually try not to change the name too much, but depending on how much work was done, potentially its name might have changed. So obviously we can answer that specific question for your environment here after the training.
Yep, Mike, we'll get with you about that in just a little while if that doesn't answer your question.
So looking at our main landing page here, this is the dashboard page here in maintenance. On this page, we just have some simple graphical reports, essentially giving us a summary of the system status and load based on a few key performance indicators here. So I have a graph that's going to show me here for the last hour, which is configurable, but by default we're looking at the last hour. Our call volume, so how many incoming calls we're receiving, and outgoing. This is going to include both. A small call quality graph there to the right. When the phones make calls, they do perform measurements of that connection. And if there were any problems with call quality, we might be able to diagnose that here. We have a graph showing us for multi-site systems, bandwidth utilization. In our case, we just have a single site system, so no data in this graph. But if you did have a multi-site system, we'd be able to look based on some manually configured thresholds, how much bandwidth is being used for phone calls across connections between networks. So if you had a primary location, maybe some remote offices, this would be relevant for you in that scenario. Just to the right of that, we have a trunk group usage graph. This will just show us how many of our lines are currently being used with active calls. Gives us a really quick idea if we're pushing the limits of our incoming trunks or anything like that. A feature usage graph here. This will show us how many times voicemail and features on the system are being accessed. And then just to the right of that here at the lower right-hand corner, we have a CPU usage graph. This can be helpful if we're troubleshooting, maybe a piece of equipment that's acting up. So some quick basic information about the system here. Now moving on through some of the other pages.
Hey, Mike, we just had another question come in. Jackie was wondering how accurate this dashboard is. Are there some key areas to look for or prompt when they do drill down into troubleshooting?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there are a few things about the dashboard that tend to be inaccurate. So one thing that we note is the call quality graph in particular. If we have a traditional PRI attached to the system as a trunk, the call quality measurements don't quite work well in that scenario. So you might see lower than normal call quality if we have a kind of a PRI connected to the system. That's not actually a call quality problem, it's a measurement problem. Mitel is working on trying to fix that particular defect here with the dashboard. Additionally, there may be scenarios where if there are integrating or SIP trunks on your system that integrate between another system or different pieces of equipment, they may appear to have higher than normal trunk group usage. Again, not an actual problem. Those integration trunks should be used more frequently. And then those are the big major defects that we currently have with the dashboard. Other than that, definitely anything that looks unusual here we'll investigate, in particular the CPU usage. If you have a piece of equipment where this is sitting above 50 or 60% for any length of time, it probably either needs to be rebooted or looked at, and that's a big one that we look at here as well. All right, so moving on real quick, just a few screens here. A lot of these we don't look at very often. This topology screen, again, shows us the logical connections between equipment at different sites in a multi-site system. Nothing to show me here since we're just looking at a single site system. The connectivity page here gives us status of our equipment attached, so physical equipment that supports the actual physical phones. So this is going to be our servers, what we call the voice switches, your SG or ST series switches. If you do have any virtual trunk or virtual phone switches, those will show up here, as well as a few extra pieces of equipment like the Edge Gateway or SA series service appliance conference bridges. So you can see here, in this case, I've got a couple of pieces of equipment that look like they're offline, which they are actually supposed to be, so this is correct. And you can see here the system reporting the status of connectivity from each piece of equipment to every other piece of equipment. This can come in very handy if we're troubleshooting some sort of site outage or potentially a network problem that might be impacting communication between different sites. We can kind of get a really quick idea if one piece of equipment can't talk to another piece of equipment in kind of both directions. And this has helped us solve a lot of network problems over the years, actually, letting us know what can talk to what. We do have an option here to set up scheduled updates for phone firmware. This isn't something that happens too frequently, so this feature really doesn't get used all that often. I'm going to skip status and maintenance here for just a second because this is a big section, just to talk about some of the others here real quick. Alerts is going to be a historical view of any alarms on your system. Just at the top of the screen, this very top toolbar where you can see these few things up top here on my system, this is your alarm bar. And if this is showing any kind of warnings or red symbols associated with these major headings, it just means that there's an alarm on the system. Sometimes these can be kind of meaningless or uneventful. Sometimes they represent something more serious, like a piece of equipment going down or a loss of service on your trunks. If there are any alerts, you can see them here in the alert section. I can also click on any of these alarm sections here up top in the alarm bar to take me to the relevant alerts. In our case, we have some alarms here you can see in this hybrid portion, which again is expected because Mitel's turned down those services. So they're no longer available. And we have a permanent alarm there because of that. We do have a call quality metric section. So again, that call quality measurement that I mentioned on the dashboard, we can drill into the individual details of that for particular calls. The event screen is going to show us, again, different event information from the system. These are going to be our alarms we talked about before, but in addition, this will be just other kind of normal information. The things that appear here also get logged to the Windows event log on the server. So this is the way we would set up event monitoring to be notified of any serious problems with the system if we wanted to get alerts on that. Additionally, just below that, a very important section here called event filters. If I wanted to receive email alerts based on any errors or warnings that come up in the events, we can set that up here. A really common configuration, and the way I'd recommend you set this up on your own system, if it's not already, is to create a new single event notification here. Leave the server set to all, leave the connect services set to any, filter the type down just to errors, and then set up the email address you want to receive that alert. Anything that is an error generally in our events is going to be something important that you'll want to know about. So definitely a really simple way to get notified of any major problems on your system just by setting up the event filters here. Under this configuration and hybrid, you may not see the hybrid option on your system if that was never configured. We do have some things we can do just to set up the configuration of this monitoring service. Usually don't touch anything there. The other major important section that we use here a lot is just status and maintenance. This is going to give us status information about the individual components of the system. Kind of everything we've been looking at so far is an overall picture of the system. This lets us drill in and see the individual components. So again, I can see that disconnected server we noticed earlier in the connectivity grid. I can see that that's disconnected here. I can click on any of these links to let me drill down into those components. So for instance, I can click on headquarters here. This is going to drill down. You'll notice now we're looking at the sites page here under status and maintenance. I can see my single headquarters site here, a rundown of all the switch and appliance components that we have attached here, and the different servers here to the right. If I go down and click here on the appliances section, this is a screen we use a lot actually, because this is going to give us a status for all the servers and switches on the system. I can click on them individually here to get detailed information about their performance and usage. So you can notice I'm looking at our T1K switch here. I can see its current CPU and memory utilization. I can see a summary of calls moving through here if we had any. And then on the status tab, I can get some really useful status information, last boot time, some memory and CPU summary information, and status on the individual PRI channels. This is where we go if we need to reboot equipment, the normal course of operation. You'll notice here right at the top, I've got a couple of drop downs. If I wanted to reboot this piece of equipment now, and just select this reboot command here, hit apply, and that would reboot this switch. If we were having some sort of problem maybe with that piece of equipment, we just wanted to give it a quick reboot, especially if it hadn't been rebooted in a while, we can see that last boot time here on the status page. We can give it a reboot command right from Director. Additionally, there's some other troubleshooting commands we can use here that come in handy occasionally. And a few other pages just to look at briefly. Server summary page, we can get information on service and restart those from here if required. The IP phones page will show me the status of all the individual IP phones on the system. So we can see a list of those here. If I wanted to do a phone reboot page, I can issue that command from here and get some additional status information on all the attached phones. Trunk groups, of course, my service coming in from my telephone company. A voicemail page that'll actually give me the status of everyone's voicemail boxes. This is, again, one that can be really useful. You might have users who have full mailboxes or situations where there might be a mailbox that people have kind of forgotten about over time. It's pretty common. You can actually go here to the voicemail tab, look at all of the mailboxes configured on your different voicemail servers, and see if you have anyone who's maybe got a full mailbox, or it looks like the messages aren't getting checked. You'll actually get little warning indicators if a mailbox is full or close to full here. And of course, you can see how many saved and unheard days if we had some really long messages sitting out there. Potentially, you can see all that here. The Make Me and audio web conferencing. Make Me conferencing is just a summary of how many ports we have available for conference calls. On a modern system, this really isn't a problem anymore. And then the audio web conferencing would show us if we have licensing for the kind of older, somewhat deprecated at this point, audio and web conferencing features of the service appliance, the SA series boxes. That information appears here, as well as information for the IM portion that runs on that appliance as well. All right, so definitely the status and maintenance section here is a big part of the system and a place we visit frequently. Now, the other major component in Director that we use is our wrench icon here, administration. And this is going to be where we go to make changes to the system. If I wanted to set up a new user, change a user's voicemail password, very common, make any other kind of change to a user's permissions or settings, as well as add new equipment to the system or change the configuration of existing equipment. All of that happens here under the wrench. And really, pretty much 99% of the time, if we're making a change here, we're going to be under the user section and on the user's page. This is where pretty much all of the settings having to do with a user or their phone live. So anything to do with their setup, how they're called, if they have voicemail or not, any of their passwords or settings, all are here on the user's page. You can see here up top in this top pane a list of all the users on my system. And then below that, kind of towards the bottom here, this is giving me detail on the current selected user here. So I've got kind of my list of everyone at the top and then a detailed view of the system here at the bottom. Now, when I look at a user here, I can see up top a summary of their information, their current extension number, their username, a few other pieces of information. And if I wanted to make changes to any of that, I can do that here in the bottom pane. Now, if you have AD integration enabled, you'll see we have Active Directory user checked here. A pretty common question that comes up when we're using Active Directory is you'll notice that some of these options here are grayed out. So the first name and last name fields are not editable. The address and username here aren't editable. If we do need to make changes to any of that, we can. All we have to do is deactivate the Active Directory option first. So you can just uncheck this Active Directory user box, hit save, and then it's going to open up these fields to be edited. Once you make the changes to any of these that you need, you can check that Active Directory user box in there again. Just make sure you fill their information back in again and hit save. And you'll notice those fields are grayed out again. But at this point, they'll have your changes. Now you can see here we can edit their name information. I can make changes to their extension number at any time. If I just simply wanted to change a user's extension, all I have to do is edit it here and the system will automatically update it anywhere else in the system it exists. Really nice feature. Their email address and client username. Always recommend that these match nowadays on most systems. If you have an older system, these may be different. But most of the time nowadays, we're going to configure this so that their email address and username are the same.
Hey, Mike, we just got another question in. Yeah. They were asking if Connect can sync to multiple AD domains.
Unfortunately, it cannot. That is a feature that we wish we had. It's come up a few times in the past, but we can currently only sync to a single domain. I'll show you where that is here under the system section of administration and this additional parameters page. This is where we enable that feature. You'll notice we have basically a single LDAP path we can search. Depending on the way that your systems are configured, you might be able to use something like NurSync or another tool to maybe bring in additional information into a root domain. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But yeah, currently we just synchronize with a single Active Directory domain. All right, back here to our users. Again, looking at this general tab, we can see some of the basic information we can edit here. If I wanted to make a user just an extension-only user, so make it so they don't have a mailbox, we can change that here with this license type dropdown. Additionally, the section just below that here is where I can choose the user's phone hardware. So you'll notice there's a primary phone port option here I can change by clicking this Change Settings link. Once I click on that, this will give me a list of all of the IP phones that are available that don't currently have a user already assigned to them in the site we have selected up top here. So for mine, I'm just a single site, and then my headquarters site, these are the phones that currently do not have a user assigned that I could reassign to Christian. Ordinarily, when we're first adding a new user, for instance, if we're just going to be adding a user to the system, you would just simply plug their phone into the network, allow it to come up and talk to the system and become available, show its status it's available, and at that point, it would be selectable in this dropdown. Some additional information here. Big one I'd point out here is this client password. Because we have the AD integration enabled here, this client password is just going to be their Windows password. But without AD integration, this client password field controls the password that they use to log in with the Connect desktop client. So in case the user ever forgets that or needs to change it, that's the client password field here on the General tab. A few other pieces of information we can edit for a user here. Our telephony tab lets us control some of the options associated with phone calls. For instance, this call stack depth represents how many simultaneous calls this user can handle at once. We have some settings here that affect the phone itself. Additionally, on this page, we have some checkboxes that are important for certain permissions, especially the use of the soft phone here. If we want to turn that on for a user, we have to check off this box on the telephony tab. On the voicemail tab, we'll find their voicemail password right up top here. So if a user, again, forgets their voicemail password or wants to change it, really easy, we can hop into Director and change it right here on the voicemail tab for the user. Additionally, depending on how the user would like their mailbox set up, if they don't have Outlook and they're not using the Outlook integration associated with the desktop client, we do have an option here to actually send a copy of any voicemails as a WAV file attached as a real email to the user. There are some other ways we can do this as well, but this is a really common one. Additionally, here at the bottom of this page, this is only an option that the administrator can engage, but automatic message forwarding will basically allow us to forward someone's voicemails to another user as soon as they're left from the first user. This is commonly turned on for extended vacations and things like that. Ordinarily, if a user is forwarding their extension to another extension, if they're on vacation or something like that, if a voicemail got left in that forwarded user's mailbox, the person who was covering for them, the message would actually end up in the original user's voicemail, not the covering user. So if I actually want those voicemails to be delivered to the user who's covering, we have to use this automatic message forwarding feature here. On the call routing tab, I'll find some options that can also be configured from the desktop client for the user. So these are things that the user can edit themselves using the desktop client. We can also edit them here in Director. If we had any cell phones associated with the user, they'll appear here. This Ring Me tab controls the configuration of the user's availability states, and ways that they can control their own phone calling experience. So the settings on this page will let me control whether that's ringing to their cell phone or not, or potentially ringing to their cell phone as an additional phone, simultaneous ring. Also options for the Find Me, Follow Me features here.
Hey, Mike, we just had another question come in. They were asking if they swap out a desk phone with a new one and pull down the extension, do they have to update the field in Directory?
Yeah, I think the question, if I understand it correctly, if we are just swapping a user's desk phone, one for another, if we have to update that, it would kind of depend on if the phone that's getting swapped in is brand new or not. So if you're just doing a phone swap between two existing users, the way that we actually usually accomplish that is we'll first go ahead and find the user who's going to be losing their phone. So one of the people who's involved with the swap, we'll have to go here to the general tab and remove them from that phone first. So you can unassociate a user with a phone just by going here and choosing this any IP phone option and saving it. That'll disassociate the user from one of the extensions. Once that's done, you can go to the user who's going to be getting that phone, go to their change settings and pick that phone from the dropdown here. It won't show up until it's been unassociated with the first user. And then once this phone is unassociated with this user, we can swap it back to the person who got swapped out originally. A little confusing, but we just have to disassociate that first. If it's a brand new phone, you won't have that problem because it won't already be associated with an existing user. Additionally, here in the administration section, we do have a section for telephones. And on this page, I can find a phone by its MAC or IP address, see the user who it's currently associated with, and this can help us track down phones in the system. We do even have a way we can name a phone. By default, phones are named after their MAC address. That's how they're usually referred to in the system. But you can potentially rename a phone here as well if it makes it easier for administration.
Okay. Mark, if that doesn't answer your question, just let us know and we'll dig into it a little bit deeper. We had another question come in while you were doing that, Mike, asking how do phones show up on that list? So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So, yep. So phones automatically or should automatically provision themselves to the system when they're first connected to your network. There's a special DHCP option that we configure, option 156, that the phones will look for when they get an IP address from the equipment handing out IPs on their network. And that option will tell them the IP address or name of this server, the headquarters server. And through that process, when a phone gets plugged in, it'll look at that option 156, find the server here, and begin the process of downloading the rest of the configuration from the server. Once it completes that process, it will automatically add itself to this list as basically an empty phone, and the phone display will say available. If something goes wrong there, if the phone, for instance, can't get an IP address, or if that option is missing, or something else might be misconfigured on the network where that phone is sitting, it might boot up, but it'll say no service. If it says no service, it's probably not going to show up in this list because that just means it hasn't registered properly with the rest of the system. But yeah, ordinarily, phones would just be plugged into the network. They'll find the server, go through an automatic boot up process, and they'll just appear automatically here once they're completely booted.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, just a few last things here on the users page, a few other tabs here. The membership tab, this lets us control kind of from the user's perspective if they're a member of any distribution list. So these are for voicemail, kind of an old-fashioned feature where we can send blast voicemails out to multiple users at once. A member of any work groups. Work groups are one of our call groups, one type. It's the one that supports call queuing. So if you have a scenario where you want to set up a call queue for something, that's going to be a work group. And then delegation tab, not used often, but this allows you to delegate control over your call states to another user on the system, common for sort of a boss assistant scenario. This would be something we'd ordinarily set up kind of at the beginning, but we do have that option here. Applications, the big thing on this tab is access to the conference bridge and instant messaging. We don't really see a lot of the conference bridge a lot of Conference Bridge usage as a Conference Bridge anymore, but it does also still support the instant messaging feature, which is fairly popular. So if I wanted to enable a user for IM and I have, a Conference Bridge on the system, I would just select it from the drop-down here, and this would be how I enable IM for a user. And then the last tab, DNS, this is again just an additional way that I can point incoming phone numbers to a user. So back on the general tab, if I have a DID that I want to have go to a particular user, a direct inward dial number, so a number that's just dedicated to them, I can set that up here. And if I had additional numbers to configure, those would get set up on this page. Again, usually something that just gets done once during the initial system setup and usually not touched again unless there are major changes to your numbers or anything like that. So as you can kind of see on the users page, that really covers a lot of our administrative burden here. Pretty much most of the common changes happen here. A few other places we can go here. So programmable buttons. If I want to reprogram the buttons on that user's phone, this is where we can do that. Kind of a deep topic, what the buttons are and a lot of the things they can do. Probably more time than we have here today, but some of the really popular ones, monitor extension. This is kind of your traditional button that monitors another user. Definitely a popular one. Also our speed dials. Those are just your one-touch dials. A few common buttons that we use. Escalation profiles are related to a voicemail to email configuration. Another way we can do that. A little out of scope for this, but something to be aware of there. User groups control our permissions on the system, so feature use and calling. Really, in most organizations, we're not going to be limiting features too heavily. One thing that I would mention here is the permissions associated with a voicemail, which I can see here, this class of service voicemail. This controls a voicemail box size. So if you do have a scenario where you want to increase the number of messages your users can hold in their voicemail box, that's actually done here through our class of service voicemail permissions. And we can go as high as 500 messages in a mailbox. So in case you're looking for that setting. We do have a section here for trunks. Wouldn't recommend mucking around in here too much. Again, these are going to be settings related to your trunks connected to your telephone service. Depending on what settings might get changed here, it can definitely affect your ability to make inbound and outbound calls. So wouldn't recommend poking around here too much. Again, under the telephone section, here we have our list of telephones as mentioned earlier. One thing I'd like to point out at this point. So to add a phone here, we basically just plug it in and connect it to the network. Once that phone is added here, it will stay in this list, even if it's disconnected from the network. So phones kind of come in here, but they don't leave unless we delete them manually. And this can become an issue over time, especially if we've swapped out any phones over time due to RMA replacements or just getting new phones from another location. We may need to potentially delete the old phone records here. The system will report that as a status defect. It'll say that basically it's missing phones it thinks it should be connected. And anytime we have a phone that's been permanently replaced, for instance, here's one I see without an IP address, I can probably delete this. We just select it here in the list, hit delete, and that'll get rid of the record for that old phone hardware here in the database. Under the appliances and servers section and platform equipment, again, we can see all these switches here, make changes to their IPs and some other configurations if we need to. Wouldn't recommend, again, messing too much with the settings here. Accidentally changing an IP address or something here could take significant parts of the system down. One very useful page I'll point out here under the features section is the system directory. Obviously, different things in the system can have different extensions. If I'm looking for a list of all my extensions for everything in one place, you can find that here in the system directory. I can search this list by clicking on this little spyglass icon here towards the middle. And if I'm looking for a particular extension, I can just enter it in here and get a link to the system directory entry. Right. Under the call control section of features here, just point out another one of our calling groups. So under call control hunt groups, this is kind of one of a few different ways we have to send a call to multiple phones at the same time. So if you are looking to put together a simple calling group, a hunt group is a way you can do that. Basically, that hunt group would have its own extension, for instance, 1934 here. And then that call would get sent to any of the members who are selected here on the members tab. We can do that as either a top-down or a simultaneous ring. We do have support for kind of old school paging groups and pickup groups. So if I want to, kind of beat the speaker and send a message to all the phones or a subset of phones on the system, I can do that with a paging group. Pickup groups, we do have that feature a little kind of deprecated at this point. Right. And then additionally here under features, work groups, kind of mentioned that earlier, but this is another way we can send a call to multiple users at a time, except this is the feature that supports call queuing. So members who are receiving calls from a work group will never get more than one call at a time. And if more calls come in and all the assigned extensions are on a call or unavailable, then those calls will queue in the work group. We do also occasionally use this as a shared voicemail box solution. So you may have work groups on your system that don't actually handle calls, but are only set up as shared voicemail boxes.
Hey, Mike, we had another question come in. The pros and cons versus hunt groups and work groups. To kind of explain the differences and then
yeah. So yeah, there's a little bit deeper water we can get into there. So pros and cons. So hunt groups live on phone switches. They aren't hosted by the server. That means they're more survivable in a situation where we're worried about the server being up. A hunt group can continue to work as long as the switch that it's hosted on, so in this case, this vPhone switch, one of the virtual switches on the system, as long as that switch is up, these hunt groups will continue to function. Now, hunt groups are a very basic sort of feature, so really the only thing that they do is either send a call to this list in order, kind of after a few rings, or I can do a simultaneous ring to the members here. Because these run on switches, there is also a load impact we have to consider. We usually don't like to get hunt groups that are handling a lot of calls too large. In fact, we usually don't recommend any more than 12 extensions anymore, max, in a single hunt group, because the load that they put on this switch can become very large, especially if we're doing a lot of simultaneous ring calls and things like that. From a user experience perspective, a hunt group can also send more than one call at a time to a user. So depending on this call stack depth for the hunt group, we can potentially, a work group can take a call from a hunt group and then receive a second call from that same hunt group, and potentially get more than one call at a time from a hunt group. Work groups, on the other hand, they live on the server. So they have a dependency on that server to operate. So depending on what we're looking at from a risk perspective to the system, just have to be aware that work groups have to have the server operational to function. A work group has a few different options for our distribution pattern. So we can do top-down and simultaneous like we can do with a hunt group. But we also have this round robin and longest idle option. Round robin basically just starts the next call at a different member here. So if a call came in and hit Paul first, then the next call that comes in is going to go to Jenna, then the next one to Ryan. A little more fair, but still just keeping this list in order. Whereas our longest idle option can give us true longest idle call distribution. So the person who hasn't taken a call in the most amount of time is going to get the next call. These will queue calls, so no user who's receiving calls from a work group will ever receive more than one call at a time from the work group. Any additional calls are simply queued at that point. And we can configure that queuing here with the queue handling tab. Sort of like a call center light functionality. We don't have all the features that you would find in a full-blown call center solution, but you know, basic call queuing and some simple announcements we can set up with a work group. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Thanks, Mike. And Robert, there are actually we have several different webinars that we've done that specifically talk about the differences in hunt groups and work groups. When I send out the link for today's webinar, I'll put a couple of those in for you as well.
Absolutely, thanks, Bonnie. All right, a few last things here, getting pretty close to our time. The auto attendant section under features, this is where we can set up our menus, our menu prompts for the system. So if you do want to set up an automated attendant, this is where we do that. We do, of course, support full scheduling functionality there, and very easy to set up an auto attendant. We can just record the prompt from a phone attached to the system here, and then just choose what we want our different options to be. So if I wanted to, you know, point a call to a hunt group or a work group, I can do that with this go to extension. If I want to have an option that goes to a voicemail, we can use our take a message. And then we can use go to menu to nest menus inside each other. Very useful. We can definitely help you set up new auto attendants or auto attendant options, or just figure out what you have now in case it's confusing on your system. This is definitely one of the things that over time, you might have auto attendants and menus and stuff in there that don't even go anywhere anymore. But you know, you're not sure if they're in use or not. We can definitely always help you figure that out. Right, last thing here under the system section, again, there's usually not much here that we touch except during the initial configuration. One thing I'll note, this is becoming, again, less and less common, but we do have a section here called local prefixes. When we used to have a lot more PRIs out there than we do now, it would be very common for us to have to dial a number, 7 digits, 10 digits, 1 plus 10, in different combinations to get those calls out. On your system, you may have a list of local prefixes, essentially just a list of area codes and prefixes that the system knows are local for a particular trunk. Sometimes we have to edit these as things change out in the wider phone system. You know, if you do have this on your system, you probably already know what you need to do to change these from time to time, but just to point out where that is, it's under system and local prefixes. So I think that just about wraps up most of the basic administrative stuff, the things we look at commonly here in Director. Of course, you know, a lot of systems may have, you know, additional configurations or additional things that we're doing. There are a lot of bolt-on applications we can use with the system to extend and give us more functionality, things like call recording, you know, automatic malicious number handling, block list, some really popular ones. So if you do have a particular kind of need for your system, or a feature that isn't built in but that you want to explore, we do have a lot of options there as well. And for sure, here at Verteks, we're always ready to answer your questions and help you out with any particular questions you might have about your own system. So please do feel free to reach out to us if you do have any questions or issues. We'll be happy to take a look at that, provide answers for particular problems, or just take a look at the health of your system in general. We do a lot of that for for a lot of customers, and we're happy to do it for everyone here. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for your kind attention, and we'll turn it over to any additional questions or anything else we have.
Yep, looks like we had one more question come in. Can you go into reporting? I know, Robert, we do a couple of different things. The Mitel reporting is a little bit generic, so we'll show you that. And then we typically use a different feature as well, but I'll have Mike show you those as well.
Yep. So really briefly, here in Director, we do have some really basic built-in reports. And really what you can see if you go here to reports and call details, basically just the stuff in this dropdown is what we can report on. And really only a few of these reports are even used commonly, so that the user activity detail and summary report, if I'm looking to get kind of a breakdown of a particular extension. If I'm using work groups for calling, these work group reports can be useful. And then potentially some trunk activity detail reports. If I wanted to run any of these, for instance, a user activity detail report, I just select it from the drop down here. I do have to click this little tiny add link to put in the extensions I want to report on. It'll ask you for a range. If you're looking for just a single extension, put the same extension in both. And then we can set some time limits here. And just a couple options. I can click Run Report here. It uses a basic sort of Crystal Reports interface to generate a kind of PDF report, although we can export this in a couple formats. I'll show you here when it finishes loading. You'll notice that these reports can take some time to generate, and this can be a problem if you're running a really big one. In my case, I only have a few calls here, and on this page here in the far upper left, I have some options. If I wanted to save this, I can do it as a PDF, or if I wanted to save it as this Excel data only option is great. This is almost like a CSV file if I'm going to be importing this somewhere else. Nowadays, these reporting options are really limited. 9 times out of 10, really pretty much 10 times out of 10, we actually recommend an add-on to the system for reporting. It's a cloud service from a company called Verteks. They offer essentially a very much enhanced reporting solution for the system and for the call center solution that's really very, very good. Far and away, much better than the built-in reporting that we have with the system. Kind of to the point that, you know, Verteks has been around for several years now. I'm pretty sure the reason why they haven't innovated the reporting is just because these guys do such a good job of it. We've covered this in some previous videos as well, so if you don't have Verteks already, we can definitely talk to you about them, get you a discount for it. We're a partner with them, so we can actually give this to you for a lower price than you can get it direct from them. So definitely what we recommend for reporting if you need some real reporting capability on your system.
And we do actually have an option where you can take a look at it, do a trial of it on your system. So Robert, our Robert Hipke is your client success manager. What I'll have him do is when he'll follow up with a lot of these questions, and I'll have him kind of show you the Verteks and maybe add that to tool your system, and that you can take a look at and see the reporting that greatly outweighs what Mitel does. So. I think that's mostly it. Anybody else have any other questions? We'll give it a few more minutes, but as always, Mike, you're fantastic. I guess I can say that because I'm your wife, so I can rub it in, but we'll give it a few more minutes for any other questions that come in.
Alrighty, thank you again, everyone.
All right, looks like most of you are starting to drop off. It will take me a couple hours to get this edited, uploaded onto YouTube, and then I will send out an email with the recording. And then the rest of you that had any other questions, we'll be following up with you in the next few days to see if there's anything else we can provide for you. But again, we greatly appreciate you joining us today. And our success that we've had with both our Mitel partner and our WatchGuard partner is all based on you guys' support. So we thank you, and we'll see you again next month.